Today we're going to go over how 1.6 is going to allow you to absolutely destroy people with swirl, like you can see here in this video. Out of all the great things 1.6 did bring, it did a re-overhaul of elemental mastery and its effects on non-vaporize and non-melt elemental reactions. This is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be going over Venti and all the things. So let's get in here for you guys. We're going to cover the builds and we're going to cover everything you can actually do with swirl, because swirl, now that it's buffed up, is one of the most misunderstood and probably one of the strongest elemental reactions in the game. And tomorrow I'm going to have an in-depth build guide on all swirl characters, swirl as a mechanic itself, but we're still going to touch on that stuff in this video. So the first thing for Venti here, very ease of use build here. His best set is still going to be the Viridescent Venerer set. This is because when you swirl doesn't do animo damage. It actually does the damage of the element you're swirling. So if you're swirling cryo, your swirl's doing cryo damage, and you're also going to be reducing the resistance to that element by 40%. Now, the only ones that do damage when you swirl are cryo, pyro, and electro. If you swirl wet, right, good old hydro, we actually just swirl the wet status effect, and that doesn't do any damage on its own. More on that stuff later there, but still, this is going to allow you to give that big element decrease down, not only for your own DPS, your main DPS, but also for your swirl character, which is a huge thing because swirl is only affected by three things: your level, your elemental mastery, and it's affected by elemental resistance, which is why this double dips in there, because it also gives you 60% swirl damage bonus. The 15% animal damage bonus, that doesn't do anything for you there for a swirl build, but that 60% swirl damage and the resist down does affect it a ton. Now, very easy to build this character, Venti, with the EM build, because guess what, guys? You're stacking EM main stat everywhere. Everything matters here. Now, the substats don't matter all that much because you're not relying on your skills to do damage. You're relying on swirl. Swirl doesn't scale up your crit rate, your crit damage, your attack. None of those stats matter. So if you want some substats, you're going to be looking for some energy recharge. You have some super god tier rolls. Yeah, you can get some crit chance in there, a little bit of crit damage there. But at the end of the day, swirl's going to be doing the vast majority of your damage. So Helm, Goblet, and Sands are all going to be main stat elemental mastery for a swirl build. It's going to be a huge deal for you there. Now, when you're looking at your flower and your feather, try to get energy recharge as well as elemental mastery on top of that. Weapons for Venti here, none other than the Stringless is going to be an exceptionally good weapon out there, especially if you're a free-to-play player. The other one is the Wind Bloom Ode, is pretty good as well. Or you can also use the big 5-star elemental mastery bow. Only use that one if you have really high refinement ranks on it, like a giant whale, because that weapon depends on the substat of having a high refinement rank to get that extra 120 EM. Otherwise, it's gonna be half of that. And if you're looking for EM, get a Stringless, just level it up and be R1, it doesn't matter, or just use the Windblown Ode, and you're gonna have 150 to 165 element mastery there. So you're trying to aim for around 800 elemental mastery. If you get better, subsets in your flower or your feather, you can bump this up to like, 850. Maybe if you max out roll everything, maybe like 900 elemental mastery, and really start going to town there. Now, on top of the gear here, one of the main things you guys need to do to maximize your swirl damage, like I said, it scales off your level. It highly scales off your level. So if you take your character from 80 to level 90, your damage from swirl goes up by 37%. If you're at level 70, you go up to level 90, your damage from swirl doubles. The base damage doubles because of that level scaling. So if you want to see big numbers on swirl, make sure you level your character up. You don't need all the crazy talents and stuff unlocked. You don't need to level up your normal attack and your elemental skill and your elemental burst on Venti to do big damage with this build, but you do need to level your character. So level them up to 80 and then get them up to 90 afterwards, so you can get huge damage from Venti. Now, some small notes about swirl. Swirl can proc 2 sources of AoE damage every 0.5 seconds, but also on top of that, say you are swirling a cryo element and someone's afflicted by pyro, your swirl will actually initiate a melt, which allows you to gain damage bonuses from your melt. So you stack an elemental mastery here. If you build certain team comps, which we're going to be going over shortly, you can really double, triple dip down in on your elemental mastery, because you're stacking elemental mastery to make your swirl better. But at the same time, look at 799, I have 110% bonus damage to melt. So say someone is already afflicted by cryo, and one of the enemies is afflicted by pyro, and I swirl the pyro under the cryo, I will then melt my swirl. So say my swirl is doing 7K, right? Well, then it gets actually melted, it goes to 14K, and then it gets doubled by my EM on top of that, it actually is a 28k swirl. So I'll hit somebody, you know, for 7k, and I'll hit someone over there for 28k. So you can make these super awesome entanglement party comps, especially with Venti, because of elemental absorption that allows you to just go on and chain, melt, vaporize, overload, electrolyze, electrocharge, excuse me, I always want to call it electrolyze, okay? I don't know where that comes from, but it's a thing that I do, and I apologize. But it allows you to really get in on there and just do a bunch of damage with one use of your elemental burst. You can get in there, you can do the swirl damage, 5-6k per tick, and that procs AoE. So if you're doing 2 AoE sources of damage, you have 7 enemies in there, well, you're gonna have 7 enemies take AoE damage 2 times each. You're getting 14 hits in just one proc of the swirl every 0.5 seconds. That adds up to a lot of damage, and then maybe you're melting on top of that, maybe you're vaporizing on top of that, maybe you're proccing overload, which is also buffed up by EM in 1.5, which leads to swirl doing insane amounts of damage and absolutely melting groups of AoE targets. So if you're looking for a 2 or more target sort of build, Elemental Mastery is definitely where you want to be on Venti. If you're looking for like single target Venti damage for some reason, even though his specialty is really crowd control in AoE circumstances, well, not only is it now crowd control in AoE circumstances, he will shred through enemies with this build. And even in 2 target circumstances, he is going to shred enemies with certain team compositions. Now, you don't necessarily need to build a team around an Elemental Mastery Venti for him to be good. You can throw him in the typical Morgana team comp or like a freeze comp with Ganyu, and yeah, he's just going to do natural swirls and it's going to be fine. That's not even abusing the stuff that we just got talking about with vaporize and melt and overload and electro charge and all this other stuff, not even counting for any of that stuff. But you can also build a team around that. Now, one of the cool teams out there that you can build is very similar to the child team that people used to use. This is going to be the Venti version of that, and it's really going to really exacerbate how strong Elemental Mastery is in certain circumstances. So this is Venti, Fischl, Beidou, and Xingqiu, and this is going to be an exceptionally powerful team here because of the effect of elemental absorption and how it just works out in the scheme of things. So you have Oz, who is going to be doing electro damage with Oz, right? Then you have obviously Beidou's elemental burst, which will cause you to do electro damage on your auto attacks for whoever the active character is. And then Xingqiu's elemental burst also does that same effect, but applies hydro. Then you have Venti's elemental burst, which is going to suck all the enemies together, and then it's going to elemental absorb either electro or hydro, and then you're also going to be doing electro and hydro damage. So you're going to be swirling electro or hydro depending on which one you absorb, and then doing both electro and hydro damage to a single target, and it's going to swirl that into the group, and you're going to be spreading electrolyze all around the group, proccing swirl nonstop over and over and over, and have them all just sort of combust and implode on each other. And that is a very, very strong team, especially for single target, because you also use this in 2 target circumstances. I'm pretty sure I've shown some footage, if I'm not showing it right now, of the Geo Vishaps on floor 12 just getting absolutely melted with 2 targets, 2 tanky ones, by the way, with this AoE damage team. Now, this isn't the only way you can run him. You can also do like a vaporize team with him. You can do like a melt team with him, right? The world is your oyster, honestly, when it comes to doing certain elemental reaction teams with Swirl. Now, there's so many cool things you can do with Swirl, and it's not that hard to do. If you guys want to see more stuff about Swirl, make sure you come back tomorrow. I'm going to be breaking all of that information down for you guys for every different Swirl character out there, so you guys know the basics of the mechanic in and out. So if you can use it on Sucrose, Venti, Kazuha coming out real soon in 1.6 as well, going to be a very good Swirl character because of his elemental burst. And the other reason to stack Elemental Mastery on him is because of his A4 passive. Swirl is just wildly overlooked now, especially in 1.6, and hopefully you'll see more Swirl teams coming to you soon. So until then, guys, want to see more stuff, hit that sub button, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care, guys.